Welcome to the Revenue Builders Podcast, a weekly show featuring B2B sales leaders and executives. Hosted by five-time CRO John McMahon and Force Management co-founder John Kaplan, the show goes behind the scenes with the people who have been there, done that, and seen the results. If you enjoy our content, please subscribe, rate, and review the show to help us reach more people. Revenue Builders is brought to you by Force Management. We help companies improve sales performance, executing the growth strategy at the point of sale. Find us at forcemanagement.com. Enjoy today's episode.
Hey, George, so in your book on being a leader, you wrote that leadership is not about your title. Leadership is about your intention and actions. Can you tell us a little bit about what you mean by that?
Sure. At the back of that book, there's 10 observations on leadership. And those are really actions and intents. And just to give you an example, one of them would be absorb uncertainty. Great teams full of wonderful people can't stand ambiguity. They want to get a decision made. And if you want to dispirit a team, just don't be, just drag things out on decision making. So absorbing uncertainty, it's an uncertain world. There's never a clear answer on any reasonable question because everybody will have a view and there'll be good views. So the intent is to absorb uncertainty. The action is for the leader then to take charge and lead the group through a series of listening and questions to get to a place where the leader thinks, I think we've got it. Not exactly consensus. Consensus is can be dangerous, but where the leader thinks, yeah, I like what I'm hearing on both sides, and then says, okay, here's what we're going to do, and I'm going to tell you why. And you read, and the leader kind of reads back. I heard this, I heard that, and I think this is so, and I think that's less important. And so therefore, the decision is the following. And then the leader, that's the action. Then the leader gets everybody to sign up, goes around the room and makes sure that everybody's accountable for some piece of the action that results from that decision. Are you going to do this? You're going to do that? You're going to do that? Yeah, I'll do that. And off you go.
Now, George, in there, you talked about listening. So to me, having been a leader, I felt that was a skill that a lot of leaders lacked. They either came in with a bias or predetermined, decision, and they weren't really excellent listeners. Can you talk a little bit about, the power of being an effective listener?
Yeah, I think listening is hard because in addition to the examples you just gave, you might have in your mind, well, I know I got an answer to this. I want to get this out. And you shoot before you think. And listening it often includes asking questions. So you listen to someone's point of view, and then you start questioning, well, why do you believe that? Or what data do you have to support that? What experience do you have that you could give us an example? And that's listening. So that you and asking questions, so that you may have a bias, but you're trying to learn. Listening and learning go together, and asking questions. And then I think, and that's true in almost every situation. Listening, you start to hear a question, and you're predisposed to, I know that. I can answer that right away. And maybe that's not even what the person is talking about. So,
right.
You don't shoot so fast.
Now, so to be an effective listener, I always felt like you had to be here, like in the moment.
Yeah.
You can't be distracted. And a lot of times these days, between text and email and the phones and all kinds of other distractions, I always feel like people are in a constant state of distraction, right? And so how important is it to be here in the moment when you're listening?
Well, that's also hard, Spouses will tell you that. Loved ones will tell you that. That's where you're going to hear that. You'll get it right away. And if you are present, it makes a big difference to the other people with you. If you're present, they know that you're absorbing, you're listening, you're asking questions, you're reflecting that you're listening. And it shows that you care. And that's a big emotion, that you care, about them. And when you're not here, when you're not in the now, you also are not caring. It's a form of not caring. And caring is an important aspect of a relationship when you're trying to help somebody or listen to somebody. And other people know right away if you care or not. Everybody has a good antenna for that.
And what about the one more part to this, Johnny, is to be an effective listener, I think you also, intuition plays a big part. So you not only have to be here in the moment, but you also have to have a really good sense of intuition of what is that person like really saying? What do they really truly mean? Can you talk a little bit about, your experience with using intuition as a leader?
Well, you just put your finger on it. I think you have this intuition, but this is what, again, I keep going back to questioning. If you ask a few questions just to be sure that you're locked in on where that person is coming from, then you can use whatever skills and experiences you have. But it's kind of like asking a few more questions about what is that from something from your experience, or are you troubled by that, or do you need help with that, or how can I help you? That kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, I think they all go together. You have to be here in the moment to be a good listener, and you can't use your intuition if you're not really here either. So I think those three things go together so powerfully.
There's another aspect to it. We talked today about inclusiveness. If you're not listening, you're not being inclusive, and it's very difficult to, or easy rather, to dismiss. As you read in the book, one of the things that Danny Lewin and I came up with on things, we did an interesting exercise when we were putting the company together. Tom Layton and Danny Lewin were the technology geniuses that really are at the heart of Akamai's secret sauce. My job was to put a business around these geniuses. And so we were working one day on things we'll do and things we'll never do. And we got focused on how people dismiss other people's ideas too quickly. The same points you're on. You're either not listening or you don't care. So we said, never dismiss an idea from any resource without due consideration. And that means if you're in a meeting of people and somebody wants to say something, make sure everybody has had a chance to say something. Make sure, and if somebody has an idea, don't just say, oh, that's stupid, or that doesn't work. You say, well, let's see, how would that work? And then let other people chime in, but be sure to be inclusive. Everybody realizes that really helps with team building.
I think one of the things that's difficult about this conversation is to really lead. I think you have to have a very creative and innovative brain, and creative and innovative brains are looking for patterns and looking for things that, like, that's how the brain works. It's like, okay, I understand that. What's new for me to learn in that? And it's hard because the brain kind of shuts down a little bit and says, okay, I've heard that before. Now let me make my own, kind of opinion of that. So I think that this is not a trivial conversation. I think it's harder to listen. The more involved you are, the smarter you are, the more innovative you are, the more creative you are. And if you're in leadership positions, that probably describes you. The other thing I think that's important is in leading groups. And I'd love to have your comment on this, George. Sometimes the greatest thoughts in a meeting are the ones not being spoken. And as a leader, you have to figure out how to appropriate the listening in the room and to make sure that you're getting the right opinions from everybody. Could you kind of talk about how you've done that in you've got, a group of people, you're leading a group of people, and there are certain people that are speaking more than others, and there are others that are listening and creating ideas and maybe not saying them. How do you deal with that in large groups of people?
Yeah, well, let me go back on just your first part that you started. I think one of the things a good listener does, is to listen for discontinuities. I thought I understood that, but holy cow, this person is saying that caused that. That's amazing. Now you start diving into that. How do you know that? What information, data do you have to support that? And when you're leading a group, I think you keep in mind who has what skills and experiences, and especially if they aren't speaking, you just go after them and say, "Well, Mary, you have had experience on that kind of a large account before, where the CIO was hostile. What approaches did you use to break through?" And you knew that Mary was very good at that, and she or he, whoever you're throwing the question to, you'll draw them out. They'll tell you.
Yeah, and it's important. It's important that you really understand your people. Johnny talks about being intimate, and it's probably the intent on this conversation, intent and actions.
Yeah,
is that you really know how certain people communicate. I actually pulled somebody out in a meeting one time, just like you're saying here, George, and the person said, "Well, I was just waiting for some air to come back in the room," because there were so many people with similar attitudes and similar behaviors, and they were kind of barking in the room. And I thought, and they weren't being rude. They just said, "Well, I was just waiting for it to settle down." And as a leader, you have to be really, really cognizant to make sure that you're getting everybody's point of view, because not everybody jumps in the same way.
No, they don't. And the other one thing you can do is manufacture a situation where you say, "Okay, we're going to split this thing up between red and blue. The red team is for this. The blue team is against it." Now I want to hear some arguments about which path you would take and why. Even though you may not agree with the path I just assigned you, give me your best shot at what we could learn from that. What do you think of the old SWOT things?
I like that a lot. I've actually done that before and been a part of the something that I was opposing and had to fight for it. And it's amazing how your personality, if you have one like mine and you like to be right, how your brain switches over to do that. I think that's a wonderful, wonderful idea. I love that.
Yeah. Well, the other thing too is about the length of meetings. One of the things that people hate is long meetings. And that's because you're getting some kind of long presentation without back and forth dialogue. But if you can keep a meeting short on the slides and get to the discussion, then use as much time as you can grant, for that meeting, for this kind of discussion we're having. Often meetings don't get to enough time for the kind of discussions we're talking about. So meeting management is really important. And the leader usually has to bring that to a close, say, okay, well, everybody understands this. We understand that's the background. But the question before the house is, now I want to start, let's start arguing both sides of this. Who wants to start?
I like that. The Amazon, I heard Bezos, there's no PowerPoints. You have to put it into a memo of a certain length. And everybody is to have read it. And I think the threat or the promise of being prepared to argue both sides is a wonderful addition to that. I think I love that.
Well, when you're writing, I love writing because writing is such a sophisticated intellectual activity because you just change a word. You know how your mind works. It's not very. The word very, very much, it's some other, and then you change that, and then you change that, and then you finally get, but overall, you're trying to write a memo arguing for a particular course of action. And and that takes a lot of time and intellect and skill and then it's easy to read and edit, if you will. That's the beauty of those memos, because somebody can read that memo in 5 minutes and say, I get it. I see that. I didn't understand that. Okay, that's good. But I have a question about this. And so it kind of gets you into the mix quicker.
Love that. And you can always tell when you go into meetings, people that have read or people that have, great meetings have pre-work or pre-read. And you can always tell when people ask a question, it's obvious they haven't read it. And if you don't have the respect or the time, it just says a lot about how you're coming to that group of people.
Or have the speaker say, it's on the next slide, of course.
It always, that always happens. That always happens. Hey, Johnny, could I, one thing I was dying to ask about, George, is you talked about a little bit in the beginning, and I call it the impermanence of life and its change. And as a leader, the biggest pushback I think that you get is human nature's lack of fondness for change. Mm-hmm. And could you talk a little bit? I found that the greatest leaders on the planet are the people that help people get emotionally connected to the positivity of change. And then people that have this issue, they really suffer. If you don't embrace the change, they suffer. So as a leader, just kind of knowing that, how do you deal with that?
Well, change is good. Change is good because it leads you to the new, and or a confirmation of the old. But change is good. My wife and I she helped move during my IBM career of 31 years, moved the family 9-10 times. The other night we were having date night together, and I said, let's go back to our first house. What do you remember the most about the first house? And all this stuff came out about way back then, 60 years ago. And you realize then that's happened in between. And so then we went to the next house. What do you remember about that neighborhood? Those and the neighbors. It was so much fun, but it just shows the benefits of change. Mm. And we say, well, wonder what we'd be like had we just stayed together as a married couple in Columbus, Ohio. And both of us said we'd be bored to tears. We would have never been in Japan for 3 years. You would have never been the CEO of Akamai. You would have never gone to the top of IBM from being just a salesman in Columbus, Ohio. You would, none of that would have happened. And we wouldn't have the friends we have in all these different cities. She calls it memory lane. And she said, why don't we go back to Atlanta? Oh, wouldn't that be fun? Well, then you say, well, that's right. So-and-so died. He or she's not there anymore. But there are other neighbors across the street. We haven't seen Tony for a long time. And it's just all the new experiences you have. So change leads to the new, and new leads to expanded thinking and or confirmation of why you were right the first time, to have a particular belief.
Yeah. Hey, George, I want to go back to the, leadership is not about your title, mainly trying to speak to a lot of the brand new leaders, people that, get promoted from, let's say, sales rep to first-time manager. And what you see a lot of time is managers using their title, as power over people, right? And the relationship becomes transactional, right? Where you do something for me in exchange for a reward or your commissions, and not to get penalized. So it becomes very transactional, whereas a leader is using their power of appeal and motivation and persuasion to get people to do things. And they're trying to transform those people. So the relationship doesn't become transactional. It becomes transformational because you're trying to develop people and appeal to their motivations. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I think you just did a good job of talking about that.
Thanks, George.
But I think that, in every leader is a manager. What do managers do? They set goals. They put numbers to them. They monitor, manage. They critique. Well, fine. That's part of the job. But if that's all you do, and you kind of touched on, there might even be a fear element there, a punishment element. If that's all you do, I don't think that you're going to bring people along and develop people. And,
right.
But the leader, in addition to the mechanics of management, if you will, also it develops followership by their attitude, by their values, by their ethics, by their kindness, by the way they treat situations where other people are always watching. Say, oh, ho, ho. Or, one day I had someone say, could we have lunch? And I said, sure. This was way back there at IBM. And they said, I saw you make that decision today. I didn't get it. I thought you were really going to burn. I said, oh, no. So they're learning from you. If someone just like on a one-on-one would say, why did you do that? And I think you learn from leaders, especially if you can be near leaders, be around leaders. That's one of the problems with remote work. One of the problems with remote work is you may not be in situ, where you get a chance on a more regular basis to see leader in operation and conducting themselves, where you can pick up on the nuances, or you can literally then go to lunch or in the hallway, ask them a question, say, gee, I was a little surprised about that. What was your thinking? And you get these insights. Pretty hard to do on the Zoom calls,
Yeah. Now, so George, you talked about like a manager is controlling, planning, budgeting, and then the leaders doing more things like appealing and motivating and those types of things. Just for first-time leaders or people still trying to get their hands around when it's time to lead and when it's time to manage, can you talk about your experiences in doing that?
Well, I think that's a very difficult question, John, because it's also situational. It's so very situational as to what's going on at that time and the personalities of the people involved. But I guess where my mind just went is to accountability. Who was responsible for what? Let's start sorting that out. Who said they would do this by such and such a date? Did you get that done? And if not, why not? Actually, in the why not is the how. And you learn, we learned a ton. We thought the goal was this, and that. And you said you could do it by a certain date, but you couldn't get it done. Why not? Well, the product didn't work. Or the competition was better, or the customer, actually, that's not what the customer wanted. That wasn't the most important thing to the customer. So, it's in the how, in explaining why and why not and the how, that you learn more about the goals you're trying to achieve and how best to achieve them. You can change.
But I think a lot of times in those situations, George, I think when someone's not doing something or failed at something, I typically think about two words like competence and then commitment. So I go into the meeting and I'm trying to think, I'm going to ask enough questions to figure out as the leader, is this person competent? And that's why they failed? They're not meaning they're not competent. They lack some skill or some knowledge, and that's why they're not capable, but they're committed. Now, if they're competent and they're not committed, that's a different issue. Now I have to be more of a leader and try to figure out why they're not motivated. Why have they always been motivated and now they're not motivated? Is there a home situation going on? Are they reaching burnout? What's really going on here? So is it a competence issue or a commitment issue?
Might be a dependency issue. One of the things that is so important, and teamwork, and teams are so important today because life is so complex and it takes different skills and experiences to come together. That's the boys in the boat, to come together to accomplish an objective. But, also to identify up front when you're assigning responsibilities, holding people accountable, what are they and who are they dependent on? What's the dependency here? Because if that doesn't occur, well, then we're not going to get the result we want or expect. And you shouldn't, I have this saying, don't expect what you don't inspect. And that gets back to the questioning and the why and the how, learning about the how something happened and you say, well, gee whiz, that was a bad assumption on everybody's part. That isn't what the customer wanted. That's not the customer's pain point. Or we were calling on the wrong person, or they don't have the budget. They're not really committed to solve this problem. They were just entertaining us or whatever. You figure out deep down who was accountable for what, who were they dependent on, and why didn't something occur? And it could be competence, but I don't know. Most of the time, I think it's a combination of circumstances.
It is. And that's what you guys just discussed there. That to me is where management and leadership comes together. If you don't understand the dependencies, that's the management part, how things work, how things operate. And then you don't understand the person and you don't have the ability to meet them wherever they are in their situation. Right. I think that's why leading is hard, because as you move up, you have to have a knowledge of how things operate. You have to have a knowledge of the dependencies, and you also have to meet people wherever they are, both competency and emotionally. And that takes effort. They say that you have to be like intellectually curious is what people interview for sellers. I actually think intellectual curiosity as you move up in leadership has to be even greater and greater and greater, because if you're not curious about the dependencies, if you're not curious about the actions, you make way too many assumptions. So I love that. What you guys just talked about is where management and leadership really come together.
But I also think it goes back to George's former point. To be an effective leader, it's really difficult to do that remotely. If my team is remote, right? I can't be intimate with my people. I can't understand their fears, insecurities, doubts, goals, motivations, strengths, weaknesses. I can't understand that if they're, 1,000 miles away and they're doing remote work all the time, and I'm never interfacing with them, never going on sales calls with them. Never
and operationally just seeing where the dependencies are. If you're not looking at it from a lot of times that whole operation is not in front of you on a Zoom call. And we're not making any statements about work from home or what have you. It's just the reality of the situation. I think you guys are bringing up great points.
Well, cities help you with this remote work thing. It's easier to get together in a city than it is across the world. And we're always going to have that because skills are going to be in different places. I work with the leadership development group at Akamai, and they have an assessment they make called 34 Strengths. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
And it's a thing that you take. It's an array of questions, and you answer fast. And you get this compendium of 34 strengths. And I suppose the ones at the bottom of the list, after they've been ranked, are weaknesses, but most important are what's at the top. And then if everybody does this, then you can log this for everybody. And when you're putting a team together, if you can say, well, I need somebody who's really strategic on this one. Let's get so-and-so in this meeting. You can click on it at Akamai and up will come a panel of faces, guys and gals.
Great idea.
Yeah. And that respond to, they're very good at strategy. And they say, oh, there's Mary Lou. Well, Mary Lou's out in San Francisco. We're here. Well, let's bring her into this discussion or the homework part of it, that kind of thing. But anyway, I think that you said making calls. Making calls is one of the best ways. You talk about being there, being in the present, being with the customer. Get out of the office, get with your people, get where the action is. Go visit the engineers, listen to an engineering discussion about how something works or some problem that they're having. Go where the people are. And so I think a leader, it may not be convenient to have everybody in the same building, but the leader could go. The leader could go places.
Great point.
And go with it on a key sales call. Learn, and the customers, of course, really appreciate it when someone in a leadership position spends time with them. But I'll never forget a lesson I learned from a person. I was making a call with her, on a customer, and the customer started to, this was at Akamai, and the customer started to describe the set of challenges they had. And that was because she had said, well, I really need to understand. She said, your business, your industry seems to have these stresses and strains, and it's got to apply to you, but I'd like to hear your views of that. And the guy says, oh yeah, we need to do better at this, and our cost reductions, and then our and our data management, blah, blah. And every time this person said something, it was almost turning it into a question about, can Akamai help me? She simply said, we do that. And I almost fell out of my chair. About 3 times, we do that. That's all she had to say. She just said, we do that. She was there. He believed her. He saw her. We were in the room together. It was so real. I said to her afterwards, I said, Allison, that was mind numbing. You didn't have to explain the technology at all. She said, oh, George, we'd have bored him to death. All he wanted to hear is we could fix that problem. We do.
Right.
That.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now,
George, I wanted to follow up on one thing,
ahead,
Johnny, on just the strengths thing. I love that, the 34 strengths. I've seen another one called Strengths Finder, and there's a bunch of them out there.
Yeah.
George, what I like about what you said is being a leader, I think you have to put people in positions that give them energy. And you should understand your people's strengths, and therefore their strengths typically are those things that give them energy. And when you put people in their strength and you put people in things that give them energy, you get great results. I've learned the hard way by finding that people do things really, really well. And therefore, I think they love to do those things, and they actually don't like to do those things. They just do it really, really well. And I didn't learn that until somebody told me when I asked them why they didn't want to work for me in that anymore. I said, you're great at it. I don't understand why you don't want to do it. And she said to me something I'll never forget. She said, I knew you were going to say that. And I want to explain to you the difference between being great at something and whether or not you like it. Just because I'm great at that doesn't mean I like it. She actually said it sucks the life out of me. Wow. And it was such a great learning experience for me. Putting people in their energy is but you got to know them. You got to be intimate with them.
Yeah, you do. You do. You have to spend time with them. Time over target.
Love it.
So George, people, one of the things that is important if you're a leader is to really love people. And personality and the differences and what motivates people. It's a science. It's much of an art, but you have to enjoy that. If you're a leader, you really, because your whole job is to inspire others to do their very best. And, and when you leave as a leader, you've left behind even better leaders because you help them to grow. And that's the measure, actually, of your own personal leadership success. But you have to love people. You just do.
Wow. How many people have you met? That's so phenomenal what you just said, that you would guess that they hate people. How many leaders have I met? And I don't know if they're burned out or they're just, it's just a difficult situation, but they act like they hate people. And, what do you think that is?
Well, they're more interested in themselves or their own problems. You have to want to get out there. And the other thing is you need to be vulnerable because you're going to ask questions that they will expose you as a leader that you don't know the answer.
Right.
And can you help me? I forget who it was. Maybe it was the CEO at one point of Best Buy said one of the things that he learned that was one of the more powerful leadership principles was to go to subordinates and say, I'm having trouble with this. Can you help me? I don't get it. I don't understand. Not because he was so smart, but because literally I don't know how to do this. What should I do? And you better be. You have to be. You have to have the confidence to be humble. The confidence to be humble. Say, okay, I'll expose myself. I don't know. Let me tell you, how many people will never say, I don't know, because they think that they're being exposed. Just say, I don't know. Can you help me? Or what do you think?
I love that. I love it because today hypocrisy is so prevalent. Like not hypocrisy, but the aversion to hypocrisy is so strong, especially in the younger generations. I find that if you don't know something, or you're asking people to do something that you can't do yourself, and you're acting like you can, the hypocrisy factor in leadership today is just so strong that you lose them right there. In the old days, we used to call it, you lose the locker room.
Yeah. Well, I think great leaders are made, not born. In other words, you have to have experiences over time that shape your leadership skills, failures as well, and have people criticize you for not being such a great leader. And if you can get through that over time, you will be a great leader. You'll have instincts, and intuitions, as we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, in your book, you do talk about showing up as your authentic self. And when you do that, you encourage others to do the same.
Yeah. In some of the leadership development classes at Akamai, I'm so pleased. I get a chance to sit in on some of the sessions are kind of a summary of what they've been learning, and the amount of candor among one another, where they've just, someone will say, "I never knew that about you," or "Gee, you really demonstrated a knowledge of something that I don't have." You can hear these people talking back and forth. So I follow up with them and I said, "Well, what's been the benefit of this class, this program, these multiple sessions together, and this openness?" And they say, "Well, in the past, I would have never called, their peers, I would have never called so-and-so, but now I do. We talk all the time. I've gotten to know 2 or 3 of these people. We get on a group call together and we say, well, here's a problem. Have you ever run into this?" And they all are chipping in, helping one another. And so your authentic self is where you've allowed yourself to be whoever you are. And you aren't everything. And other people have different strengths. And other people have different insights. And other people there's a chemistry. They're willing to help you, help others, that work together. Yeah. And but they won't do that if you're not authentic. If you say, "No, I know who you are. I trust you. You trust me. I heard you say what you didn't know in those meetings. And I also heard what you do know. And that's why we're talking today. I need help with this."
Yeah. You say in the book, the key is to be aware of who you are, and having self-awareness.
Yeah.
And, of all the leaders that I've seen, it takes time for a lot of people to be truly self-aware of who they really are as a leader and how they come across with their words and their actions to the people that work for them.
Well, you should just be yourself. That's number one.
Yeah,
Don't be somebody you're not. But the other thing is, you better watch your words and your actions. That's one of the challenges, is that you're always somebody. The folks are always watching you. They're watching. Do you have a smile on your face? Are you energetic today? What's your attitude today? It's amazing. You can affect the attitudes of others just by your own, and you don't even realize they're watching you. And you also need to watch your mouth. One of our granddaughters works for a company, and she said, "Papa," she said, "the CEO uses the F word all the time." I said, "You gotta be kidding." She said, "No, we're in these meetings, and it's F this and it's F that and boop, boop, boop." And I said, "Oh, Whitney, I'm so sorry." She said, "Yes." She said, "We talk about it when we get together over drinks." She's in New York City. And she said, "I'm not going to stay here." She said, I'm just not used to that." She says, "I use that word, if I'm really mad or something." She said, "But that's different. That he's just putting a poison over everybody. You get tired of it." And and by the way, it's not very intellectual. There's a lot of words you could use other than that word about a situation. You could describe the situation differently. I saw there was an interview with the fellow that's the head of this very strong venture firm. Oh dear, he's the son of the former Prime Minister of Africa. He's the leader now of this firm, but he doesn't use profanity. And the comment he made was, that's just a shortcut. It just shows you're not being intellectual. What are you really describing? What are you really saying? And he says, so I make it a practice never to use profanity.
That's discipline. I love that.
Yeah, but a lot of people say, well, don't use profanity because it's offensive to others. True, but it's also a reflection of your lack of intellectual thinking about what you're talking about.
I also find that it's also kind of, you're relinquishing your leadership, or you're abdicating your leadership to the mob or to the group. I've seen people do it. Change their language when they get up in front of a group, and you don't hear them talk like that normally. And you realize the only reason why they did that was to, in some way, try to connect with the group in some way. And it actually, I think, has the reverse effect.
Toxic.
Yeah.
Whitney was describing a toxic environment.
So,
George,
John, you talked about the knowing yourself, and I think we're self-aware. And I think what we're also talking about here is, like, I think the greatest leaders on the planet have made sense of their own stories. And I don't think you have to be 60, 70, 80, 50, or whatever. I don't think it's an age thing. I think we all have stories. Everybody has a story. We have a history. And if you've made sense of that in a way that helps you be better in front and with others, it's very, very powerful. I think the greatest leaders have done it. And you can tell the ones who have. You can tell the ones who have not.
Yeah. Well, they tell stories. They express themselves in stories. Often examples of something they're teaching. And in return, you'll get another story from someone else. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you're telling those stories, what I find has been very important is, in order to meet people wherever they are, I noticed it first with my children, was being vulnerable and being able to tell the story that wasn't a great outcome for me, but was still a learning experience. And so you have to have humility. You have to be real. You have to be authentic. And I think that's just not in parenthood. That's in relationships. That's in leadership. I think that's a way of building trust with one another.
Yeah. Especially time over target. If it's not.
Yeah. You said that a couple of times. What do you mean by that? Time over target?
Just experience with people, same people. Sooner or later, you can't varnish. You can't varnish over fissures. Everybody has their strengths and their weakness. You can't be somebody or something that you aren't. Yeah. Although you can demonstrate that you're improving, you can do that, and I think that's motivating to everyone.
George, being a leader, talk a little bit about how important it is to recruit the right people onto your team.
Yeah, this is a challenge. Recruit the right people on your team. I was in a car ride once coming from a Harley-Davidson board meeting with the CEO of Cummins. And we got talking about this, recruiting the right people. And he said, he says, it's one of the hardest things. He said, I think I've been only right about 50% of the time. I said, my gosh, that's an amazing. He says, well, the problem is, the skills, their experience, but when they get together in a group, where is the chemistry right? Are they willing to work with one another? And you don't know that until you bring the person into the group. You say, okay, you're now the head of this, you're the head of that. And he said, it's how well people end up working together, boys in the boat, putting their oars in at the same time,
Yeah, you're making that reference to boys in the boat. I just wanted to give people a little bit of a heads up. I want to call it a rower, but I think it's called something else. Tell us a little bit about where that comes from and what do you mean by that?
It's sculling,
Sculling.
Rowing. Oh, it's a very sophisticated, like all sports. Akamai sports really is very sophisticated. I mean, you can watch any professional sport or watch any but playing tennis or just neighbors playing tennis. There's just so many things that make a person better at that sport. And lots of practice. Doing the right things. That's the same with leadership. Just the constant practice, be aware, and work on things.
And you're talking about as a leader, though, you're putting multiple people in the boat. That'll be like putting multiple tennis players in the boat at the same time and making sure that those strengths and weaknesses match. So you really got to know your people. You got to know your team. Just because somebody's a great leader or if somebody is a great producer in one environment does not mean they'll be a great producer in your environment. And that takes knowledge and intimacy.
Well, yeah, and it takes being in situ with one another. Do you really work well together? Because personalities then become involved, and that's just not something you tested for. How do you know? That's one of the challenges of building a board of directors. You can bring people. People say, well, okay, we have the skills matrix. That's a big thing now with the governance group.
Yeah.
We like to see a skills matrix of the members of your board of directors because we think we know something about your business and why are these people directors of the business? It doesn't measure chemistry. The skills matrix doesn't measure chemistry and how well people get along and work together. And as the CEO of Cummins said, he says, you often don't know that until they're in situ. And then you say, oh my gosh. And it takes a while to figure it out. What's going on? Why aren't they really cooperating with one another or as helpful as they could be to one another?
Any advice that you have for us? I love this. I'm reading a book right now on the original astronauts, and they were all test pilots. And so you would think the greatest test pilot in the world supposedly was Chuck Yeager, but he was not selected for the astronaut program. And when I was reading the book, I was fascinated because he was more of a daredevil. And he was more of a pushing to the thresholds versus getting the outcomes that they were trying to scientifically test. I was just fascinated by that they had back in the 60s, that they had the foresight to be able to say, how's this individual going to work with these other individuals when they are the greatest at what they do? And he didn't make the cut. And so advice that you have, how do you do that instead of figuring it out later? You've brought them all in there. You can't do that in the space program because people die. Like, how do you figure that out beforehand, how they're going to work with everybody?
Well, there may have been other jobs for Chuck that really play to those skills with a couple others just like him, where who knows?
Oh, yeah. He went on to test all the rockets and everything, right, but he just didn't go to the moon.
Yeah. Well, that's who knows? Who knows?
But how do you have advice when you're looking at an individual? This is a powerful point for me. And Johnny's talking about recruiting. You're looking at an individual. You say, I love this individual. They're great at this. You can't just stop there when you're the leader. You now have to place them in the boat.
Yeah.
And how they're going to roll with everybody.
Well, you have to make a decision. You just do it or you don't do it. It's too hypothetical what we're talking about right now, Cap. But yeah. You just make a decision, do it or don't do it. That's what they did with Yeager, apparently.
Yeah. Do you ever use other people in the boat to see how they're going to, like, you're going to hire somebody onto the team for an executive position? You already have an executive team. Are there things that you can do to make the executive team participate in their own rescue in the decision process or what have you?
Multiple interviews. Oh, yeah. Yes. You group interviews. I don't mean all at once with one person, but I mean to go around and meet various people and then get your team members' assessments about what they think, how they would get along, or whether the person has skills that they say, oh my gosh, we don't have those skills in the team. This would be great. You get their reactions to the potential hire, if you will.
Love that.
George, in the book, you talk about creating clarity, which I think is really important as a leader, to take complex things or things you want your people to do and making them really simple for your people to understand. not giving them too many things.
Right.
So they know exactly, when they roll their feet over the side of the bed in the morning, the feet hit the floor. They know exactly what you want from them as a leader. Can you talk a little bit about creating clarity?
Well, it's so important for teamwork that everybody understands the goals, and there shouldn't be, a big matrix of them. It should be pretty clear what you're trying to achieve, but you really want the people to say back again, what are we trying to do and why? And these are the goals, and these are the right goals. And and a leader can ask now and then, do we have the right goals here for what we're trying to achieve? And they have a big discussion about what are we trying to achieve? We're trying to become this. We're trying to become that. We're trying to become better at this. And we want to move on from that other product area. Are we doing that? And do we have the right incentives in place? Are we motivating people the right way? But one thing that's extremely important, I think, is repetition of the goals. You have to almost say something 6 times in 6 different ways before you could, let's say you're in Boston, before you can go to California and have the person in San Francisco tell you what the top 3 goals are. It's amazing. It's like telephone, it gets screwed up along the way. So I think there's a certain amount of repetition that's required, and a certain amount of you tell me back, what do you think the goals are? And why do you think that? And you'll learn so much from your own people about, oh my gosh, you think that's the goal? That's not what we were, but that's a pretty good goal.
Yeah, right.
We need to incorporate that.
Now you talked about, setting standards of performance and goals and holding people accountable. I found that a lot of times, especially first or second time, leaders, what they do is they're great at rewarding the consistent overachievers, but they're really poor at holding the underachievers accountable for their actions. Have you seen that movie play out?
Always. And people always say when you finally get that person off the bus, James Collins, to get the right people on the bus, the wrong people off the bus. Everybody says, I should have done it sooner. I should have moved sooner. I didn't take that action quick enough because it's demoralizing to the team. The team will tell you that finally, because most people are decent people. They're kind. They don't like to run around, turn people in. Although you can tell by maybe a lack of enthusiasm sometimes about what people think of someone. But it'll finally come out and they'll say, oh, thank heaven, that was killing us. This person was killing us. They said they'd do one thing and they never did it. And they couldn't count on them. I was dependent on them. It didn't work, whatever. And that was also the replacement sometimes brings a whole new life and a whole new perspective to the table. And everybody says, oh, wow, not only did we eliminate a problem, we improved our hand. Look, holy cow, now I got to up my game because this person's such a achiever.
Yeah, I found that, when you don't hold the consistent underachievers accountable, essentially what you start to do is punish the consistent overachievers because they start to look at you as the leader and say, don't you see what's going on here? Like we're consistently overachieving. We're doing exactly what you want us to do plus more. And there's some people on your team that are not consistently doing it and you're not addressing the situation. So now their performance starts to drop and they're starting to look at you as the leader as, why is it that you can't see what we see?
Yeah. Well, where this really gets writ large is in combat, where you're dependent on somebody else for your life. That's the exaggeration of this point where you have the wrong people. Get them off the bus. Collins wrote well about this, James Collins' book.
I love this example.
What's the name of, I'm sorry, Cap, what's the name of his book, George?
I've got it in my book here. I can't remember the exact title. It's what,
we'll figure it out.
No, we can look it up. It's Good to Great. Good to Great.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Johnny, you were going to say something.
I was just thinking about a couple of things as we were talking. The initiatives and clarity that you guys we're talking about and how important it is for that. And I was thinking about, Jack Welch, and I think the number of initiatives in the 30 years or whatever that he was leading GE, I think it was like 6. And I don't know, George, if it's the sign of the times that just doesn't exist anymore. And you talked about the repetitiveness of making sure that everybody's emotionally connected to, in a sense, I'll call it the why. Emotionally connected to the why. I found that fascinating that he only had what an innovator he was, what an incredible leader he was. And yes, there's a lot of stuff's written after the fact. And I'm not highlighting anybody's personalities or what have you. I just, this point on initiatives, that there were only 6 in his 30 years, I found that pretty powerful.
Yeah. Well, he got a lot of things done for his time. And, but I don't think his leadership style was timeless.
No.
Right.
Because things change all the time, and people need to change with them.
Do you think that's something that's I always think about that. I go into some companies and I see all the initiatives they have, and they're on 13 pages of paper or what have you. And then I see other companies that have maybe, smaller number. And I always try to figure that out. Is it a different time, or is there something to that? The fewer, the better. How do you figure that out? How do you know?
Well, usually it depends what you're talking about. If it's a measurement metrics, if you have a whole bunch of them, that probably isn't as wise as having good old fashioned revenue, operating margin, and earnings per share, things like that. But on the other hand, there are things like mission. Akamai's case, make the internet fast, reliable, and secure. Purpose, we make life better for billions of people, trillions of times a day on that network, Akamai's network. So when you combine thoughts like that, and then with numbers and particular goals, or you have a new initiative, okay. When we started, we said, look, we have a virtuous circle to hold, and it was called Customers Network Technology. And if we could spin this fast enough, more customers, expand the network into the other networks. In other words, Akamai is really an overlay network across the many, many, many ISPs of the internet, thousands. And we put servers as close as we can to where the actual customers are of the website owners. Akamai's customers are the people that own the website that want to use the internet for business. But often they are connecting to consumers, they're connecting to other parts of their company and so forth. So our early goals were pretty straightforward. We say, if we want to grow, we need more customers, expand the network, more servers in different networks in the right places around the world, and add value, add services. And then we can hold people accountable in just those 3 chunks. And most of our management meetings were, how many more customers did we get? Did we get more servers into the AT&T network? Did we add edge side includes, which allows you to do dynamic assembly of web pages, that kind of thing. Did that get done? And who's using it? That, and I think on your question of simplicity, yeah. Customers network technology, spin that virtuous circle as fast as you can.
I like that. Clarity.
Yeah.
George, in the book, you talked about the guiding principles for the Akamai team. One of them is listening. The other one is having a huge sense of urgency. I want to talk a little bit about that, which I think is so important also, but I'd love to hear it from you.
Well, great people like to get stuff done. I mean, what are we doing? Why did I come to work? We're just sitting here sucking our thumb. No, we like to get stuff done. So urgency, but it's also then gets manifested into enthusiasm, into attitude. Cap, you were on that earlier about everybody, going at it, having fun, getting things accomplished, ring the bell, every time. All those things are kind of important, but in a competitive world, if you need to do that faster than the other company, the other competitor, the other people, I always tell the Akamai people, you can name this competitor and that competitor, but you know what? They don't have you. They don't have you in the boat doing this together, moving mountains as fast as you can, working together. They don't have that because they don't have you.
Yeah. They can replicate your goods and services, but they can't replicate you.
Yeah.
I like that.
They have it, but they don't. And you're off to the next one.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. One other one I wanted to talk about, because I've witnessed this myself with many leaders that worked for me and still, talk to me about, what's going on in their lives, is as a leader, be kind to yourself. And I found the way I interpreted this, George, was if you don't take care of yourself as a leader, then you lose yourself, then you lose your perspective. And as a leader, the one thing the people that work for you are counting on is you maintaining perspective over the decisions that you're making for them.
Yeah.
So I've seen many people lose themselves because they stop working out. They stop eating the right foods. They just start to burn out.
Yeah.
And in many cases, they're the last ones to realize that they've lost themselves. So can you talk a little bit about be kind to yourself and what it means to you and the Akamai team?
Well, I mentioned in the book Attitude, this guy Swindoll said he's convinced that life is 10% what happens to me and 90% how I react to it. And I've always loved that because that's true. It's your attitude and your ability to keep in balance and to inspire others because they're watching you all the time, with your values, with your ethics, with how you take care of yourself, with your discipline, and your teaching when you don't even know it. If you're acting in a balanced, organized, enthusiastic way. And that's what you want everybody to act that way. This book that is about how everyone can be a leader. It's not this hierarchical thought. It's if you come to work, you can be a leader too. And what happens when everybody's a leader? Oh my gosh. I mean, this is a machine, man.
Yeah.
And by recognizing they have strengths and weaknesses and willing to work with those whose strengths they don't have, but, as a team, and you get stuff done and have a lot of fun and celebrate together as well. Pressure and intensity are not always a bad thing. They can bring people together, and then when you achieve a goal, then celebrate like crazy. Make sure everybody knows who did what. That's why the other thing is be kind to yourself. Keep a diary. I tell the people that all the time. I say we're always doing new stuff. We're always in the next phase of evolution. It's a continuum because it's the internet. This is the Akamai focus. It's the internet. And there's always something new, and you're working on that. So keep a diary because you'll be able to look back and say, you know what? That feature, that function, that customer, that new way of treating employees, that's there because I worked on that. That's a contribution. So keep a diary. You'd be amazed about when you look back on something.
That's tomorrow's memory lane for business.
Yeah, tomorrow's memory lane, right?
Yeah. I love that.
Hey, George, so I wanted to ask you this. When you were CEO and you look back, was there one skill that you felt like was most important to you as a leader or you relied on the most?
Let's see. Well, I think I love people. So working with people was the skill that I relied on the most. And that's reflected a lot in this book on listening and caring and asking questions and trying to get the conversation going in the reverse way, coming back to you. So you're learning. I used to have even though I was a physics and math major, that doesn't mean so much in terms of the technology and how fast it moves. I always felt a little vulnerable on the technology and tried as much as hard as I could on the financials. the financials are really important. You really ought to understand your numbers, and you ought to understand where there's leverage and not. So spend time on that. But sometimes I just didn't understand how things work. But the joy is, and the engineers will respond in a second if they sense that you're genuinely interested in what they're innovating, and just say, how does that work? They'll go on day and night and explain to you what they're doing and how it works. And so that was the learning. And I would try as hard as I could to keep a lot of that in mind. And that's what I meant about discontinuities. You could be down the road away in a meeting and someone would say, well, this is the way this function works. And you say, well, I didn't know that. I thought this, and that. And everybody kind of laugh and say, yeah, it used to work that way, but it doesn't that way anymore. So it was a discontinuity to me, but to them, it was a continuum or an evolution. It was more innovation. So
that's come up a number of times, George. So do you think, like, when you were listening to people in your team most of the time, you were listening for those types of discontinuities?
Well, you just recognize it when it doesn't make sense, especially a subject that you don't think you're the expert in. It could be that your humility there is helpful to you in that, I thought pattern recognition. I thought I understood this. This is not what I heard before. And now I'm astray here because I'm not the engineer. So you stop the music. You just add, wait. I thought that it did this, it did that. And often they'll say, well, yeah, that's different. It's changed or whatever. You'll learn from it. It's a discontinuity to you. Maybe that's the arrogance of knowing so much about something, you don't recognize the discontinuities and you might not pick up on something really important that changed.
I think that sums up a lot of what you put in this book. And we'll just remind the listeners on Being a Leader is a wonderful read. I call it like a handbook. I read it on an airplane ride back from California, and there's places to make great notes in it, and my hat's off to you. One of the things that you keep talking about is this humility, and I'm reminded of my grandmother who told me, like, hey, if you find yourself, if you're the smartest in the room, then you need to get the heck out of that room. And, I think she was saying something to me because I was a football player trying to make it in business. But I really, really appreciate that. There's this humility when Johnny asked you about some of the greatest takeaways as a CEO. And I just wanted to thank you for writing this book. I wanted to thank you for being authentic and for putting such a brand of humility in this reading. It was wonderful. Well done.
Thank you, Joe. Cap, very much.
Yeah. And the same, George, for everything you've done, on this episode of the podcast. You've really been your authentic self. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me. I do appreciate the kind of the promotion of the book because it's for a good cause. Any proceeds go to the Akamai Foundation. But just to close out here, this is the book that I would give to any person going into business. Because if the question is, oh my gosh, I got my first job, how should I act? Take the self out of this. Just read this book. This is how this is what you should have your eyes and ears open to, and how you should act. Do your job, help others, be kind, and
love that.
You'll be very successful.
So we're talking about On Being a Leader by George Conrades, who was the original and former CEO of Akamai. So thank you, George. Thank you, Cap. And thanks to everyone for listening to another episode of the Revenue Builders Podcast.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. Be sure to check us out at forcemanagement.com.